Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar for the SSE Alumni, hosted by the Stockholm School of Economics in collaboration with the American Friends of SSE. I am Krister Holm, and I have the honor of moderating today's exciting panel discussion about retail and e-commerce after COVID. I don't think I could have come up with a more timely or relevant topic, so I really hope you're going to be a great and engaging crowd. We do want to get questions from you as we go along. So we are very fortunate to have alumni on the panel that I think are uniquely positioned to give us some insight and different perspectives about how they see challenges and opportunities in retail and online, and how business is evolving during and after COVID. I'm going to have them introduce themselves in a moment, but I'll take this opportunity and I'll introduce myself first. So by way of background, I've been in the US for about 13 years. I'm just here an hour north of New York City. And most of my career was in banking and finance for about 26 years in London and Sao Paulo, Brazil, in Prague, Madrid, New York. And I started in Stockholm back in the day. And then the last 3 years, I've done something completely different and very, very interesting and rewarding, being an entrepreneur. So I started a company here in the US with some partners from Brazil. So we are manufacturing pet products in our own factory in Brazil. And here in the US, we are selling to retailers. And we are also pretty big online, both on Amazon and our own web channels. We are in about 1,600 pet stores now. So this is pet specialty. So we've seen a lot of up and downs over the last 3 months. For us, mostly positive actually, but we'll get to that in a second. So before I allow the panelists to introduce themselves, just a few things. As you probably know, American Friends of SSE is the SSE Alumni chapter here in the US. We hope that you are all receiving and reading the alumni newsletters and that you are aware of the now pretty extensive offerings of webinars and information that is available. And as always with these things, I think that the alumni organization is only as good as we all make it. So we do want to hear from you, email, phone calls, get some ideas about things you want us to do in the future, or for that matter, things you don't want us to be doing. So before we get going, just some housekeeping rules. We do want you to participate and we want to get questions from you. We want to make this as interactive as possible, And please use the chat function and you can send questions directly to Anna and she will make them, magically appear on my screen here. So it's not don't be shy, don't wait usually until the last moment, ask them along the way. And there are no points for the best questions. We have about 75 people signed up, so we have decided to mute everyone. And if you could turn on your videos so we can see you, and it's fun to see everyone, if that's possible. And it's going to go to the history books. We're going to put it on the website and make the show available afterwards. And before we get going here, I just want to thank Anna and Yuchen, who have been very helpful in organizing this. So before we get to the agenda, I'm going to ask the panelists to briefly introduce themselves. And I think, Carl, you have the nicest tie, so I'm going to let you go first.
I do have the nicest tie, as a matter of fact, and it's not a coincidence. My name is Carl Rutberg, and I'm in a very sunny and beautiful and not humid New York. And I'm the creative director and founder of a company called Linman New York. And we do custom neckwear. We do it for individuals, corporations. We also do a lot of work for Broadway, movies, televisions. So all industries that are currently shut down. So great. I'm also a professor at FIT, which is the Fashion Institute of Technology, and I teach courses on American history, culture, and fashion. And now I'll hand it over to Marian.
Hi there, I'm Marian Wheatley. I attended Handels and graduated from the Master's in General Management program in 2012. I currently am in Chicago, as you can see behind me, sort of fake. But I work for Topco Associates, It's a co-op of independent grocers. So we help them aggregate their business and we do private brands for them. So I'm in charge of every non-food brand, which is all your cleaning materials, pet foods, and anything that doesn't involve actual food that you eat. So passing it over to Eric.
Hi, everybody. I'm Eric Hewlin. I am, well, I don't want to date myself too much, but I'm an '02 grad from SSE, the one we had before, that education. I've been in the US off and on during my life, I think over 20 years now, but this stint is 14. I moved here for an MBA at Columbia, and then I went to restructuring for a couple of years in 08 to 11, so hit that stride. And then I just fell into fashion actually in 2011. I ran the Swedish fashion brand J. Lindeberg here in the US for 5 years. Then switched to running all the men's fashion trade shows, so very big trade shows in New York and Vegas. Then I ran my own consulting firm for basically fashion brands and investors looking at the fashion world. And then in January, actually joined a New Order, which is a B2B e-commerce space for retailers and brands to be able to buy from each other, which it turns out was about as timely as going into restructuring in 2008. So we've had a very, very, very busy quarter, and we're doing lots of things to digitize platforms from trade shows actually to big retailers to brands. So it's a kind of an interesting time for us to be here. With that, I'll give it to Sean.
Hi guys, I'm Sean Rizvi. I graduated with a master's in management from Handels in 2012. So the same year as Marian, we might have run into each other. My memory is bad from that time. But I'm the founder of Just Ads, which is automating digital marketing. So basically you can think that currently, if you really want to be smart about your marketing, carry out performance marketing, you need agencies, you need tons of Excel spreadsheets and macros and scripts and hacks. We're making all of that accessible to the average user who's not an expert through an easy to use automated platform. And I have to add, I guess, that it feels like it's also a good time for us from a business standpoint, because of course, with e-commerce booming, we've found that the opportunities, of course, to market products online has increased, and new opportunities are arising in that area.
Very good. So we're done with the introductions. I'd like to kick off the panel here. And we were going to start with Carl to give us there's always some history that we can learn from. And I think it's true for COVID as well. We may not see it just now, right now, but I think, what can we learn from history, and has this happened before, and what's unique about COVID? And I will hand it over to Carl.
All right, so actually we're in a fascinating and a bit scary period in America right now. And looking at three major events of 20th century history, we can look at the Spanish flu from 1918. I'm sure you've read about it. Some 700,000 American people died, about 100 million people worldwide. It must have been terrifying to deal with this virus with so little information. Then we have the Great Depression, 1929 to 1941, 25% unemployment. It was a period that affected everyone in America and the country. We could have lost our democracy, which obviously happened in Germany. And then we have the 60s, specifically the end of the 60s, 1968, 69. It's a period when Americans realized that the Vietnam War could not be won. Martin Luther King was assassinated. Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. Enormous anti-war demonstrations and riots. And of course, why I'm mentioning these three major 20th century events is that we're experiencing all of that right now. Right now, today, June 9th, 2020. And on top of that, right, we're also experiencing incredible political instability. And that is also history. If we look at 1919, Woodrow Wilson suffered a major stroke and he was out of commission. In fact, his wife, his second wife, ran the federal government. When the Great Depression hit, Herbert Hoover was president, a brilliant guy in many ways, but completely unsuitable to deal with the Great Depression. In 1968, Lyndon Johnson was president, also in many ways a good president, but the Vietnam War destroyed him. He did not run for re-election. Instead, it was Hubert Humphrey who got the nomination. And of course, Richard Nixon beat him in 68. And we all know what happened with Richard Nixon. And of course, today we're experiencing the same thing, right? We have an incompetent president, and might be the worst in a century and a half. There were some real duds around the Civil War. And of course, we're 145 days from the election. So again, all of this wrapped up today, June 9th. And if you see a little bit, so what happened after these major events? When the 20s, you know, right? Roaring 20s, Jazz Age, Gatsby, specifically women entering the workforce and starting to consuming. We saw department stores, clothes, some 40% of the household budget went on clothes in the 1920s. So boomtown USA. After the Great Depression and after World War II, we're entering the 50s. An enormous economic expansion in the United States, probably the largest expansion in human history, and we're not likely to ever see it again. The 70s, however, not so fun. High inflation, high interest rate, New York declaring bankruptcy and on the verge of collapse. And of course, the question we're asking right now, what route are we going to take? Are we going to take the 20s or 50s route, or are we going to end up in the 70s? And one thing that's going to be very important to look at here is what is happening with the American middle class. Because in the 20s and 50s, the economic boom was driven by the middle class. But what is going to happen with the middle class today? If we begin to see the middle class contract, if we begin to see people falling into poverty, then that's going to be big, big trouble. And let me just say one more thing and then I'll stop. As scary as the situation and as serious, and it really is a serious situation right now, but as serious as it is, we should also recognize that a week ago, 10 days ago, a private company, basically a private individual, fired off a rocket into space, a manned rocket. And the point I'm making here is that America has enormous ingenuity, enormous creativity, enormous entrepreneurship, which is represented here on this panel. And this entrepreneurship, creativity, can-do spirit seems to always sort of lift the United States. And so even though we're in a tough place right now, I would be very reluctant to bet against the United States. Thank you.
Very good, Carl. Great perspective there. I'm going to start getting into some of the questions that we had posed here. And I think we'll start with the immediate and short-term impacts of COVID that the panelists have seen in and around your businesses. So I think we can, why don't you start, Eric? Your wholesale, you're uniquely positioned in that intersection, wholesale, retail, technology, and the fashion industry. So I think I'll hand it over to you, and then we'll take it from there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So I think what's interesting, what's happened this year, I think we went into this year in January thinking this was going to be a supply chain shock, right? From, if I just speak about the fashion industry, which I work in, fashion retail, everybody thought it was going to be about supply chain. Then that all shifted in March and it became a demand shock, which is obviously much worse. And so even us, if I look at across the industry, about every single company basically shut down here, which meant, the furloughs as we see today in terms of just like the unemployment rate has spiked up. But that meant that there was no cash in the system whatsoever, which also had effects on a company like ours, which is actually pretty well positioned. But if nobody is buying anything, it means nothing's coming in. So in that case, even if you are in the second or third degree away from that, at some point you will be affected. So that, I think, from March and April were very, very tough months for most people and for most companies. I think you saw a lot of people kind of just folding at that point. Now, I think May started to bring some opening, more not so much because of the US, but because of the rest of the world. I think Europe, being about a month ahead of, let's say a month and a half ahead of what's happening here, started to open up some kind of demand, at least also a glimmer of hope that actually there's an end in sight, or there's some other process in sight. So we started seeing that from our perspective, where people realized, even department stores and retailers here and also brands there, realized they had to kind of figure out a way to become accessible, even if you couldn't do it the old way, right? To be able to come there in the physical world to see things, which then obviously then led to, I think this is going to be probably our strongest quarter, which is kind of ironic. But I mean, the thing I think here, the road to kind of get back to like a functioning retail environment here is very long. It's going to take a long while, I think, as well, like for that to come back. I would say there's some positives, and in case there, feel free to interrupt me if I've been talking too long. But I think that I think the positives coming from this, if I just look at it that way, I think that when we looked at the US before, I think we were over retailed by a lot. Like if you look at like coming into 2015, I think one of my favorite stats is, I think the US had something like 25 or 26 retail square foot per capita here, and they compare it to the UK, it's 10, or it was 10 at that point. So meaning the UK is not under retailed by any means, I wouldn't think people think, but the US is way over retailed. So you look at what was happening before this came through. Macy's was announcing they were closing 125 stores, which was long overdue. And then you see everything now happening, the 5-year shift happening in 2 months, which is extremely painful. But at the same point, it drives some sort of change. And to Carl's point, I think the ingenuity and the new kind of models that will come out of this will be very interesting. Some models I think were stifled before of high rents. Like you look at New York, like extremely high rents for every location. Now that's not going to be the case anymore. I think you'll see a lot of that happening in the real estate side, where you'll see a lot of drop in rents. It's because it's going to have to happen as we go forward, which will open up for new innovation. So I, for one, I'm on Carl's side. I think there's going to be positives coming out of this that we don't know right now. Just as a lot of the gig economy, if you will, that was born in 2007 to 2009, under that, like what happened then. So I think that it'll be interesting to see people who've had 3 months cooped up in their apartment, what kind of ideas they come up with. Will be interesting to see as we come out of this. That was a very long way of saying a lot of things, so I hope that made some sense.
No, I think that's good. That's helpful, and we'll keep going and hopefully come back. I think well, I'm going to ask Sean here to give his perspective. He's in the middle of helping small companies selling more on e-commerce, helping agencies become more effective in helping those companies sell more. I'm not sure that every single mom and pop store in the US is going to be successful going online. So that's a question for the panel as well. And I'll give it to you, Sean, in terms of what you are seeing. And also we have a question here, which is, what online business is the most interesting to invest in today or pursue as an entrepreneur? So Sean, you're not allowed to use this as a hiring forum.
So I'd say that there's lists around on the second question first. There's Google Trends about what kind of e-commerce products people are searching for. And those lists, if you want to look at what kind of products people are searching for right now as the short to medium term opportunity, you can get a lot of good ideas from those sort of lists. Back to my personal experience. So it's been very interesting. There's two customers that are on sort of different ends of the spectrum in terms of their size. There's a big fashion designer, and there's a really small boutique startup making perfumes. And they've had different pressures. So the smaller startup selling perfumes, they were getting a big chunk of their sales previously from wholesale, and those orders just basically evaporated overnight. But fortunately, we were able to very fast within a couple of months of working with them, we were able to replace all the wholesale orders with the compensate for it by the increase in digital marketing. So that was their experience, that they lost those wholesale deals, but they managed to use their social media branding to leverage performance marketing. So what they did was, one of the reasons it made it easy for them to get there very fast was that they already had a, let's say, like 20,000 Instagram followers who were very engaged. And what we learned was that if you have even a relatively small social media following, but these are people who really care about your product, then you have enough data to find similar people on Facebook and other networks whom you can then show ads to. And those ads then perform a lot better. Then on the side of the bigger fashion designer, I guess their approach to it was very difficult because their problem was very difficult. They had warehouses full of product that they plan to sell in retail stores and other in-person events, and they realized very early on that they're not going to be able to sell as much through retail. So they started to have sales on their products, and through heavy discounting, they managed to sell a lot of the inventory at a reasonable margin still. So yeah, it seems that there's, number one, specific product categories that are doing better than others, that are serving immediate needs that have been created. And then the strategy for dealing with it differs, of course, between whether you're a large designer or a really small startup selling a small number of products. Thirdly, I'd say that distinguishing and really having a real audience really matters. As Carl, you were saying, not every mom and pop store is going to be able to do it, because if you have a mom and pop store, most people come there just because it happens to be on the way, and maybe they've been going there for a few years. It's just convenient. But if in-person convenience doesn't matter anymore, then you really have to stand out in terms of how you relate to people, how unique your product is. Maybe you identify some unique supply chain advantage that allows you to sell something like masks for low cost. So you got to have a stronger differentiating factor or competitive advantage to be able to successfully put yourself online, because of course competition is also increased. Everyone else is trying to rush into the digital sphere.
Scale applies to online sales as well, very much, right? So I don't know if anyone, or I don't know, Eric, or if anyone had any comment about that, but scale matters here as well. It's not that easy. And you're also trying, Sean, you're trying to help ad agencies also scale, right, and become more efficient.
Yeah, exactly, because it's more difficult to coordinate anyway, right? The more manual processes you have, the more you're going to be impacted by remote working. Because I remember there was a lot of work. You're working on some spreadsheet, creating some report. You just pull someone over, have them sit next to you, and work those things out. Those kind of tasks are more difficult working remotely. And agencies, I think, are also one of those business models that were already kind of semi-struggling, I'd say. The big ones were fine because they had the networks and the established customer base. But I think even before COVID, agencies were struggling a bit, especially in Sweden, I know for sure, where it just, the math doesn't add up. You have to pay people a decent amount to have them be working as an employee, and then advertisers cannot pay enough to justify those costs of agencies, right? But yeah, we haven't worked with an agency yet, but we do see that as an opportunity, because we really feel that the key thing for agencies would be to increase the number of customers they can handle per account manager. And if they can, I think their future business success depends on significantly increasing that number, and that can only happen through good automation, where you remove the manual work and make it such that one senior account manager isn't just handling 2 customers, but rather 6 customers.
Right. Good. So if we move on here, and please send your questions along. We got a couple, so please send them to Anna, and we'll bring them up here as we go along. We'll probably come back to the best online business to invest at the end. Let's see if we have some ideas.
I just want to say one thing. I forgot to say, I was in Home Depot the other day, and I wanted to buy one of these lights that you use for these online Zoom meetings. And I spoke to 3 people who worked in the lighting department of Home Depot, and none of them had any idea what I was talking about. And my point here is that what we've seen before in the United States, and what we're going to see even more of, is a digital divide. There's going to be a segment of the population who's going to be very comfortable doing Zoom, working online, meeting online, buying online, selling online. But there's going to be a substantial percentage of the American population who is not going to do it. And I think, and Eric, you might know this better, but I think the store in the United States with the highest margins is TJ Maxx. And as far as I know, they don't sell much online. That's all in-store purchase. And I just think it's important to remember, right, that there's a huge segment who's not part of this online at all.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think it's disproportionate what's been, how the effect is. I think also if I relate it back to, say, the apparel world, for instance, it's not necessarily the luxury brands that are hurting. It's the ones that's selling kind of affordable, like moderate to lower priced, because that's really the part of the population that's hit the hardest. So I think that part also fits to, like, what we can do here. If you work in a factory and you have to assemble something, you can't do that on Zoom, right? So that's the part that kind of really affects a lot of the people here. That's something to connect to as well.
Right. So if we think about some of the challenges your customers and vendors, I'm turning to Marian here, you're kind of in the middle of, you're helping some large major grocery mass market chains in the US sourcing product. What have you and what have they had to deal with?
Yeah, so for those of you who aren't in the US, if you go to a grocery store now, at least a couple months ago when COVID first kind of hit the US, you would walk down the cleaning aisle and there would be 0 products on the shelf. We're kind of getting back into a better situation here in the US, where you might see a sign that says only 1 cleaning product per family per week. So there is more supply coming in. But in terms of providing private label to independent grocers, there have been obviously a lot of challenges because the national brands weren't prepared for this swing in demand. So the smaller manufacturers that my company works with create private label brands for many different companies such as Walmart, Kroger, etc., and we're one of their customers. So seeing that increase in demand has really caused a lot of our manufacturer partners to have to scramble to create more efficiencies within their supply chains. For instance, instead of creating 5 different container sizes of bleach, including some scented ones, they're now down to 1 container size just to be able to pump out more product to get it onto the shelves. So it's really been an interesting journey in terms of how do we supply people with what they need at a basic level without providing maybe as much variety. And then, as Eric mentioned, the people who are hit hardest by COVID are the people who really can't afford those extra luxuries. So the nice thing about being in private label is that we're seeing a lot more people come to private label because it is cheaper while providing, the same quality that they're finding in other national brand items. So it's been interesting. Another thing that's been a big topic for my company, as those of you in the US may have seen, are the meat manufacturers. There's a lot of concern about the supply chain with meat. And so we've had to figure out how we're going to continue to supply meat through our vendors without, there are some suppliers who are shutting down due to COVID, running rampant in their facilities, et cetera. So just trying to understand where we can create more efficiencies. If we suggest that our grocers put more promotions around chicken instead of pork, for instance, it's really figuring out what the supply chain looks like throughout a grocery store, which is an essential service throughout the US. So we are getting better, just to let everyone know in terms of what's going to be available on your local shelves, but we are still anticipating that things like cleaning supplies could be another 18 months away from being actually back to where we were prior to COVID. And that also is a global impact because the things such as your containers made out of plastic are coming from places like China, which their factories are shut down due to COVID as well. So it's very interesting how the global supply chain has been affected and how that's impacted everything from our daily lives and what we eat throughout this.
Do you see anything changing more strategically in terms of how you source, diversifying your supply chain, maybe away from someone that was responsible for maybe 80, 90, or 100% of some? Do you see that happening?
I think that's definitely been a learning in terms of we need to make sure that we have backup suppliers to be able to supply things when we do hit these big demands. But of course, everybody else is also trying to find those suppliers. Right. So it's been a challenge to find that balance and then understand, first we need to dig out from where we are and then get on stable ground and then try and figure out what our strategy can be going forward. So it's been a tough mix, but that's definitely something on everybody's mind.
Right. Anything else from the panel in terms of supply chain challenges, diversification?
I'd say then, like in the beginning of the year, right, when everybody thought it was going to be a supply chain problem, I think everybody started shifting away from, let's say outside of China, which is obviously a very big hub for a lot of fashion production. They would shift it to either to other Southeast Asian countries. They'd go to Vietnam, or they go to Thailand, they go like to other countries that could fulfill that. But seeing more and more now people going to South America, for instance, for here, like for American companies producing in South America. And then also, I think it always comes up like from time to time in terms of the Made in America part, which some parts will work, some parts won't because of the cost structure here. So, but I think South America, I mean, I think as more people know, they realize also just like kind of having all your eggs in one basket is not necessarily the right thing. And just trying to create like a more robust supply chain. Because I also think that people realize it's not, yes, this is that first big hit, but it'll probably come up, like there'll be other hits that come up as well. So you have to be prepared for it.
Yeah. I'll throw in there, I initially thought with, talking specifically about China, I thought that the trade war that started and the tariffs that would change some of the US manufacturers. I thought that was very slow. But now the last few months, if anything, I've seen that being triggered. And some major retailers are moving and understanding that, the private label cannot all come from one place. So, we are doing pretty well here. I have two more questions. I'm gonna, let's take this one right now. So it's, with online, as a question to the panel, with sales online increasing, how do we see fulfillment developing, and how do we achieve, costs to serve that along with long-term profitability? So it's easy to sell online. How do you get efficiency in your fulfillment? And the product mentioned here, home furnishing solutions, but I think it matters to anything. Anyone want to grab that one?
It's a good question. I think if I look at just like, I think the development, then it's hard. That's a very hard thing to say. I think the problem is that we've jumped 5 years in 3 months. So I think there'll be the disruptions that can't see, like it's still, some parts will have to still catch up gradually. I think it's going to be something that's going to go faster, obviously, but to catch up from going from, I think, sorry, harping back to apparel and fashion, but that's the industry that I'm in. But I mean, we used to be at, I think 20% was bought online take. And I think now that number is probably up to like 40%, like 30. I think the trend line was that we basically hit what was 2030. We hit that now. Like that's what happened. So I think from that perspective, having just like the fulfillment part becomes an issue. But I think specifically now fulfillment is an issue because of its manual labor. right? So that part also becomes very difficult, like for US-based warehouses anywhere, because then you can't have people so close to each other right now too. So that's a difficulty now, specifically also be able to handling that volume with the restrictions of manual labor too. It's not an answer to the question in terms of how do we do that with efficiency, but it's more like more highlighting the problem there. I do think, I mean, even if, you know, I think even if the share of online has increased, the overall purchases decreased though. So I think in terms of actual volume, I don't know exactly how much has actually increased. It probably is increased for certain players, but overall, I mean, the volume is down in terms of buying anyway.
Yeah, I can see here in my space in pet stores, pet specialty retail. Yes, they are selling online, and also what I find interesting is some of the large major distributors in the space are also helping stores sell online. So how do you do that last mile? Well, you can't ship the product multiple times. You need to get it hopefully directly from a warehouse to the end user. So the distributors are more and more getting involved with that as well, helping their clients, and that again, you know, and then so.
But
I don't know much about Sorry, Eric. You can finish your point.
But I was saying, I mean, I mean, it's a model that really Walmart brought up, like to be able to combat like Amazon, having that last mile being at the stores, because they have stores everywhere. So then Absolutely. If you can leverage them, I also know that I think that Zalando is doing something similar in Europe, where they're basically getting local retailers on their platform to be able to fulfill stuff that they can't, right? So like you have kind of a symbiotic relationship there too with them to kind of just like to leverage then the physical, like the physical proximity of these smaller stores. Sorry, Sean.
I was just adding that I don't know about the fulfillment perspective, but the question mentioned profitability. And there, I think performance marketing is quite critical. And I can just give a quick suggestion on, for somebody, say, selling furniture, which is what I'm assuming you mean by home furnishings. For products that are high value, that don't drive a lot of volume, especially for a small business, like if you're selling furniture online, it's not going to be a lot of orders that you're generating. It can become difficult to figure out what your cost of customer acquisition is, to know how much you're actually spending to generate a sale, what your ROI is on that. And I've seen a lot of advertisers over the years just, you know, run into this problem as if it was a wall in front of them. But the solution is a lot easier than you might think. I think what I'd recommend is start optimizing towards something other than the actual order, final purchases. Because if you have 10 campaigns running different types of ads for different types of audience, and you have only, say, 10 sales, you're going to have no data on which to decide how much to pay for your ads. But if, on the other hand, if your KPI that you're driving, let's say the goal for your marketing campaigns, if you take that to be something a bit earlier in the conversion funnel, say when somebody adds a product to cart, you consider that a conversion. What that does is suddenly you have a lot more data. So instead of having 10 orders, you maybe have 50 add to carts. Then you can start to optimize, because then you can start to focus on the campaigns that are at least getting people to add your product to cart. And then from that point onwards, you can optimize your landing page and make sure that once someone's, you know, adding a product to cart, why are they not purchasing it? And, you know, you can have your development team take care of it, but you can make it a lot easier for yourself in the beginning if you aim for something that isn't a final order. So it's like a lot of people think, I want to optimize for the ROI. But this is like an indirect way to do it, basically.
Sean, what kind of budgets do you work with? What's the minimum amount that you would recommend someone spend on online advertising?
I'd say online advertising is a lot about experimentation, you know, especially unless you're like a massive advertiser that already has, you know, a massive budget. If you're starting off, start with like $1,000. I think that, you know, try a couple of types of campaigns. but direct it well, right? If you just launch some random campaigns and then see what you got after $1,000, and if you don't see the numbers you want and just give up, that's obviously not going to work. What I recommend, and this is what I did with this boutique fragrance startup that I worked with. They didn't have, like, our first monthly budget was like $1,000, but we tried a couple of different campaigns, got an early sense of what was responding better, and then we just we built on that. So that's what I'd recommend. Yeah, try a couple of different things and iterate.
Okay. Very good. I think we were going to talk, we've covered some of it already in terms of, I've just asked the panel, have we seen any really creative approaches and new opportunities out there? Eric, do you want to take that one?
I don't know. I mean, I see some parts, like, are people, like, I'd say brands getting together, right, to kind of address the same community. I have it where, like, it's, and also kind of using it from a side of delivering something good too. So there's something called Brands for Better, where there's like 50, 60 brands, or primarily direct to consumer brands that have gone together, have their, like, a unified website where they basically target similar customers, like, to each other. But they've been able to, I think, raise like $4 million for COVID-related charities in about a month and a half or 2 months or so, which is pretty good. But it's really that part to understand also, where I think they also realize where some part of marketing, and Sean, be interesting to see from your perspective here too, where, you know, 5 companies are spending the same $1,000 on the same customer, where at some part, if you also can kind of combine forces a little bit, maybe you can create some value for that customer by giving them a different basket of offerings, where you're not just it's not just my brand, it's like, it's our brands and it's our look, kind of like, you can do that, which seems to be happening. I think still, like, I think what's interesting now, I think this is kind of the renewed revival of the direct-to-consumer brand, because they were kind of fading before this, where they were all going from just online to going to retail stores to going to wholesale, more for the cost of acquisition for one, but also, you know, they would just seem to be, retail was still pretty attractive. So I mean, those guys that had, like, you know, 70 to 80% online, they're not as hard hit as the ones who are like the flip side on wholesale. So that's not an answer in terms of what's innovative things, but it's a little bit different approaches, I think, to address the consumer now, which I think is interesting to see.
Right. And that brings up the question also, how are those, and that's a question from the audience also, how symbiotic is the relationship between brands and physical retail is going to be long term? They are both pursuing online sales.
I mean, where I see it, I mean, it's almost where the physical retail will not be so much like the transaction that happens in the store. It might be more just kind of like a shopping window, right? You won't have, I don't think you'll have, what I said before, given that you see changes in terms of retail rents, I think you might see different models where people have more, some have more of that, say, like the consignment part, or just like, you know, it becomes like that showroom mentality. You can come and see product and then you can maybe purchase it online. It might be more of that. I still think there's a portion, there's a number of products that you kind of need to see in person. Although, like, since the volume of foot traffic will be significantly lower, you're gonna have to adjust for that in your business model too.
I mean, what I'm seeing, we're obviously in a niche market with neckwear. And what I'm seeing is that smaller specialty store in New York, and I would imagine this happening all over, are closing. And instead, who's going to survive are the bigger players. But there are a lot of people in America and Europe who do not want to go to department stores, who do not want what everyone else has, and who are looking for something different. And those are customers that find us. So I think there is an opportunity for smaller, specialized brands who are sort of turning away from the mass market. And this opportunity, you know, sort of unfortunately, right, but this is going to increase because the smaller retailers will not survive. Already, I've had two clients of mine, they've shut down and they will not reopen.
think to add, if I may add to that too, I think we're going to see also, we're seeing there's going to be a wave of bankruptcies coming as well, right? So you look at like every brand that came in, there were lots of brands that probably shouldn't have been around before this, but were underfunded or, they're just on teetering the margins. They'll be likely gone in the next 6 months. And so I think there'll be, just as there was kind of an oversupply of retail, there was likely an oversupply of brands too. So you'll have a weeding out of that, which will also open up white spaces for new product and kind of some new thoughts in terms of brands too, which in the end will be interesting. It's obviously heartbreaking on a personal level for lots of people, but I think it's still like it opens up for opportunity too.
I think one thing we should also, it's not happening right now so much, but it's definitely on the cards for the next 12 to 24 months, which is augmented reality. Apple's working on an augmented reality device. It's rumors, nobody knows for sure. But they've invested in augmented reality from a software standpoint for a few years now. And even from a hardware standpoint, they've added a lot of hardware in iPhones that support augmented reality. So they've identified that as a key future platform. And especially given the rumors of Google Glass coming out as early as mid-2021, that will create completely different opportunities for retail. So, if you're thinking about creating $1 billion retail business right now in 5 years, it's probably going to be in virtual reality. Like you can still do some retail, you can obviously, people want things. If they can find it offline, they'll find it offline. If they can buy it online, they'll buy it online. But if you talk about a massive disruption in retail, it's pretty clear to me that that's coming in virtual reality. In less than 5 years, I think at least you'll have the ability to have a really slick, easy to use Apple Glass device that you wear, and you can, try on bow ties or whatever. We already have the image processing technology. If you look at TikTok and other apps, there is enough image processing technology now to do things that in 5 years ago we didn't consider easy, right? You couldn't just have an app that automatically removes your background or, like changes your hair or these sort of things. That technology has improved quite a lot, and it's continuing to improve. In a couple of years, you'll just wear your Apple Glass and look in the mirror, and you're wearing whatever you're trying on, and then you just ask Siri to buy it for you. So I mean, it's also I don't want to be too futuristic, but I feel
it's kind of getting into the long-term permanent impacts that we see from COVID. I mean, it's early days. It's hard to pick winners and losers. I think a lot of the panels, I'm getting some questions around winners and losers and what to invest in. But I just find there's a wide range, right? If you ask the epidemiologists, I saw this research in New York Times the other day, I think it was yesterday, they were interviewing 511 epidemiologists in terms of when they were expecting to get back out there and take a plane and shake hands and send their kids to school. So that's maybe on the extreme end. On the other hand, we already see that the US is opening up. I was mentioning to some of you that flights people are back flying, and the transport, the TSA, the Transport Security Administrations is they're up from 4% low in April 14, April versus last year, up to 70 now. So it's starting to happen. And I'll turn it to you guys. Do you see anything already that you think are permanent, meaning what? Meaning a year or two of impact? Do you see Carl? I mean, what do you see?
I wish I'd become a divorce lawyer. I think that is a booming business, for another year or so. No, I mean, it's the obvious answer. So I think real estate in New York is going to take a hit. There's no doubt that offices are not going to be as full, and retailers, as we already discussed, are going to go bankrupt. And no doubt about it. But also, as I said before, that there's going to be business here to be made for the people who are not who do not have the technological capabilities. And that might be the easiest way to make a lot of money. There is an expression, I don't know if you heard it, but they say if the client arrives in a limousine, you leave in a bus. If the client arrives in a bus, you leave in the limousine. And there is some truth to that.
Eric, any winners and losers? Permanent change in behavior? Some things you don't think you will be doing differently, so to speak?
I think I've taken many a kind of a day round trip to Los Angeles from New York for a 2-hour meeting. I think that's not going to happen again. So I'd see for the airlines, business travel, I think will be down quite a bit. And I think you'll just look at like which ones. If I was a client working with a consultant, I'd question every single travel they make, because you can, you know, we've all gotten used to this medium, even if it's not optimal. If you can do 90% or 85% of the job at 20% cost, you'd probably do that. So I think for the airlines, I think that's going to be a big thing going forward, even though and specifically business travel, that's going to be a big thing that I see at least. I think the real estate thing will be a very big thing. I think this having where you can question your, do you need to commute? Or is it so bad if you only have to go to the office once a week? You can start to make different decisions, how you want to live. So I think that's going to be a very big thing from my perspective.
Yeah, Marian, anything? What do you see?
I guess it's an interesting question about people, right? Who are they winning or losing? And I think there's some instances where people are winning. I mean, I enjoy staying home more often and working from home. It gives me more time with my family. On the flip side of that, for those people who have lost their jobs, I think that's a really terrible place to be in, and people are very nervous about what's going to happen. Here in the US, people don't know, is the economy going to recover fast or slow? And I think kind of that feeling of being safe is something that we've all sort of lost in a way, in terms of personal safety. In terms of kind of business wins and losses, I think what you're saying, everybody, about, real estate is a really big one. My office said, when we go back, which will be September at the earliest, it's only going to be at most half the people going in at one time. So probably going to downsize that office, and then there'll be some empty real estate if anybody wants to come to Chicago.
Windy city, cold in the winter. What about the universities there? You have some big ones in Chicago, obviously. How is that going to be?
Again, don't really know. Some universities here are saying they're planning to have classes in person starting in the fall, and others still haven't figured it out. So I think that's still another unknown. And I think that's another place where people are losing. Here in the US, we're seeing a lot of graduates who are feeling unhappy that they didn't get to have their big pomp and circumstance for their ceremonies. So it's interesting.
But I think that's going to be, sorry. And in terms of the tuition, in universities, is going to be questioned so much more, and that the growth of online is going to be a much bigger thing too. Just because I think the cost of going to university is bizarre, right? So you look at how high it is to go. Just the ROI question is a very big thing. So, outside of a select few universities, I think it's very hard to justify what you're paying $60,000-$70,000 a year for. So I think Scott Galloway is one who's really rallying against. I mean, he's an NYU professor, but he's really going on his own now to give his own, kind of online MBA classes and stuff, which is, it opens it up for more people, but then costs can go down too. So I think we'll see a lot in education will be very different.
So I have to say, as a teacher, there is the difference between a face-to-face class and an online class. I mean, they're two different things.
Sure.
And I think for a motivated student, an MBA student, it might work well, but for the vast majority, online education is not going to be a solution. They're just not going to get as much out of it.
Yeah. No, I think it's almost a different seminar about just education. I agree with both of you. I think there's no way that people are going to pay. You need the online. You need the direct in-person experience, and I think that the US universities are better come up with a plan for the fall. Or there will be some major changes.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's no way that people are paying 70K for online training. No, I just don't see that.
I feel like online education will just become a more likely option for many people, which will force the in-person programs to rethink their cost structures, perhaps, or compete essentially, because
There could also be another where we're creating divisions in America. Some students will only be able to afford online education, and then there will be some who can afford face-to-face, and the divide between the two will be tremendous, and that's a real danger, I think.
I mean, if there's I don't know, I see this future of the Stanford MBA being something like the actual education happens over Zoom, but then you take all these, all the students out for weekend seminars or some trips, etc. Because frankly, that's most of the value. If you go to Stanford, you don't go there to learn how to make, a profit and loss statement, right? You go there to meet people and to, find co-founders and partners and whatnot. So I feel like it might just become separate, that it's the same program. The education still happens online, and then they just they just lose the pretense that in-person is for the education part. It'll just have in-person networking and mingling common, perhaps.
Yeah, more of that hybrid model. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have a few minutes left. I have a good question here from one participant about the small independent small brick and mortar shops, and they are dying or not, and if people don't people at the end of the day enjoy the sensory experience of shopping and feeling and seeing merchandise?
I was just listening to a podcast with Marc Jacobs, and he was just, I can't believe this discussion that stores are going to go out. I love going shopping. He said he'd dress up, he goes into a store, he feels the fabric, the quality, he looks, it's a sanctuary. And he said, I just can't believe it. But Marc Jacobs is turning 60 soon. And that might be a generational thing that will disappear.
I think it depends on the price level and who you're actually serving. So I think it's like if it's like a, I don't know, 20 pack of t-shirts from Walmart, you can probably buy that online. But if you're buying one t-shirt for $200 in the store, you probably want to see it and feel it first, right? So there's the two different levels there too, which also kind of goes to the division. Because I do think, I mean, if you look at, it's that part, like where they're the ones that are going to be able to afford to have a store is a higher price point. Like you can justify it better. Otherwise, you need volume of people. It's like if you don't need that, you just need a couple of high transactions. If you're Chanel or you're Celine or somebody where one person coming in that makes your day or week, you're fine. But if you're somebody who needs to have at least 100 or 200 people coming by every day to make purchases, that's a different story.
I would agree with that. I mean, we've got people in my local area saying, where can we support local businesses, or with Black Lives Matter, where can we support local Black businesses? And it's going to be those shops that have that higher price point because people can afford that. Whereas people who have lost their jobs probably are going to be shopping more at price points that are lower, and that's going to be mass merchandisers.
And likely online.
Very true.
Wonderful. We are 1 o'clock sharp. I think I'll like to thank Marian, Carl, Sean, Eric. Very good. And I'll hand it over to Michael Guthammer briefly to conclude and mention something about AFSSE, American Friends. So thanks. Michael, are you there?
Great. Yeah, thank you, Krister, for a great job moderating. And really big thanks to Carl, Eric, Marian, and Sean for participating in this and making it a reality. And of course to Anna and Yushin for helping us organizing it with the school and getting a lot of people from Sweden and the rest of the world participating as well. That's really terrific. So we started this alumni group in the US 15 years ago in New York, and I think we've made great progress since then. Of course, with the COVID pandemic, it made things difficult in terms of physically getting together, and we had to postpone events, including our annual Valborg dinner in New York. But on the other hand, it's pushing us to go online and do these things, it's increasing our reach and audience, and that's I think a positive thing. So we're hoping to do more of that in the future. And so we're very receptive to your ideas and your input for doing other events, webinars or other online events, and look forward to doing that. So thanks everyone for joining us today. Great to see you, and be well and be safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
guys.
Bye-bye. Thanks.